Hello, my name is Michelle, and you're probably watching this video because you either know me or my husband Glenn in person, or maybe you've met us through looking at my blog where I talk about all sorts of things, including travel and adventure and health and fitness. Most of you probably know that Glenn and I just spent the last 6 months taking a break from work and traveling around the world. And where I work, it's been a tradition for longer than I can remember that when you come back from a big international trip, you're asked to give a presentation to staff so that they can learn and live vicariously through you. And so, of course, when I came back to work, there was no exception. And so I put this presentation together to share with my work colleagues, and I got a lot of great feedback on it, and so I thought I would just record it and post it on my blog for those of you who are interested if you want to hear about our trip. And so that is what I'm going to do. So give you a little overview of our grand adventure. So to begin, I want to give you an idea of where we traveled. We started in our home in Portland, Oregon. We went down to California, spent some time in New York, then we went to Ecuador, a side trip out to Galapagos, and then an even bigger side trip out to Easter Island, went to southern Chile, northern Chile, into Bolivia, then into Peru, and then all the way up to Manitoba, Canada, and then all the way down to New Zealand, southern Australia, including Tasmania, and then to Thailand, and then back home. So over the course of 6 months, that's where we traveled. And we did a lot of that travel by ourselves. So here's Glenn and I in Ecuador. For most of the photos in this presentation, I've put the location in the lower left-hand corner. So we spent a lot of time traveling by ourselves. We also traveled with family. This is Glenn's brother Chris and his partner Darlene, who joined us for various parts of our trip. We traveled with big groups and in particularly in Peru and Thailand and Bolivia and Tasmania. We traveled by rental car, car by hire, which, as you can see there in the upper right, worked out better sometimes than others. We had modes of transportation towed behind other modes of transportation, and we also had a camper van that I think has to be one of the tackiest vehicles I've ever had the pleasure of driving. We also rode in a very scary tiny little plane that I'm not sure was exactly airworthy. That's Glenn there on the left and me in the purple shirt on the right. We did tons of walking in all sorts of weather and terrain. We also did lots of bike riding over all sorts of terrain and various degrees of difficulty and fabulous scenery. We also traveled by boat, various forms of boat travel, some motorized, some not. And then all sorts of other modes of transportation. The upper left-hand corner are some rail bikes. We biked on these things about 30 miles on now abandoned railroad in New Zealand, horseback riding, snorkeling, and hang gliding, just to name a few of our other modes of transportation. So now to give you a little sense of some things with our trip by the numbers, and this picture cracks me up because for those of you who don't know Glenn and I, it might look like we are staring adoringly into each other's eyes in this romantic scenery here, but actually I was probably pinching him and yelling at him to get him to stop making stupid faces and ruining yet another picture. And so this is me pestering him to smile and be nice for the photo. So by the numbers, six. Six is the number of months that we were gone. We left in August of 2015 and returned in February of 2016. 175 days is the number of days we were gone. 24,611 is the number of missed computer updates on my computer at work. So my first day back at work, this is what my computer screen looked like, and it took all day for our technology folks to get it running again. 9, the number of countries that we visited. And 3 is the number of different languages that were spoken in those countries. So we had English, Spanish, and Thai. But I would argue that Chilean Spanish Kiwi and Aussie are also different languages, and then if you add in the indigenous languages in the countries that we visited, it was definitely way more than 6 languages. 8, the number of vaccines that we had to get, close to 2 million is the number of steps taken, and 2,000 is the number of miles that we walked. That's me there in the middle in the purple. 2 is the number of shoes that I walked the soles off of. 515 is the number of meals that we ate out. And 11 is the number of pounds that I gained. 4, the number of grubs that Glenn ate in Ecuador. You can see them there on the left. They were these big bulbous wiggling things, and you basically put them in your mouth while they were wiggling around and bit their head off and swallowed them whole. So 0 is the number of grubs that I ate while in the Ecuadorian Amazon. More than 4 is the number of times we ran into really weirdly colored water. 1 speeding ticket. 14,000, over 14,000 was the highest elevations we achieved on multiple different high altitude hikes. And for those of you who have had the pleasure of hiking at 14,000 feet or above, it's definitely quite an experience. There is not a lot of oxygen up there, to say the least. And so these were really significant physical adventures for us, and we had a great time. So one of those climbs was this here. This is Fuya Fuya in Ecuador. We also climbed a big mountain in Chile, and here we are with Glenn's brother on the top of that. And then also the infamous Dead Woman's Pass on the Inca Trail in Peru. About 4,327, I sort of lost count along the way, the number of dogs that Glenn loved on while we were gone. I had always fancied myself to be the dog person in our relationship, but I learned on this trip that Glenn is definitely the dog whisperer, and wherever there were dogs, they were sure to be hanging out with Glenn and getting lots of love and attention from him, didn't matter what country we were in. 7 that we know of. Narrowly avoided natural disasters. So I wanted to just share a few of these with you to give you a taste of what we experienced. So the first here, our first international country we went to was Ecuador, and this is Cotopaxi, which started erupting for the first time in over 70 years, and this is what it looked like as we were driving out of town in Quito, Ecuador. So it was super exciting to be able to see a volcano erupting in real time. Also in Ecuador, we got to experience some active landslides. You can see the landslide there on the road ahead of us. So certainly very dangerous situation. And, the landslides happen. You move the debris out of the way with the bulldozer and everybody keeps driving along. So that was quite a harrowing experience. When we were in Santiago, Chile, 2 days after we left, there was an 8.3 magnitude earthquake, which then caused a tsunami to hit Easter Island, where we had just visited. In Melbourne, when we arrived in Melbourne, Australia, we brought with us a big heat wave that resulted in a lot of people having to go to the hospital. To escape the heat, we decided to head down the southern coast of Australia along the Great Ocean Road, and you can see here Glenn hiking down to the beach, one of the beautiful beaches there. And so here we are hiking one day, and the next day this area was ravaged by bushfires, including destroying 116 homes on Christmas Day. We headed down to Tasmania, and here we are hiking the overland track in Tasmania. And 2 weeks later, they had to evacuate hikers off of this trail by helicopter because of bushfires. So to say the least, Glenn and I at times felt as though we were 2 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because everywhere we went, death and destruction and sort of natural disasters seemed to follow us. So we tried not to develop a complex, but needless to say, we were a little surprised when some of the subsequent countries allowed us to get visas to enter, because who knew what was going to happen next. So moving on, sharing some information about sort of some of my things that made the top of my list for different experiences, including meeting this wonderful, beautiful sea turtle in Galapagos Island. So the hottest place we traveled was definitely the Amazon jungle. Both Ecuador and Bolivia were super hot. I've learned that I do not do well in hot, humid temperatures, and so I was fairly miserable. Just the idea, thinking about lifting your arm was enough to make me break into a sweat. So that was definitely the hottest place. The most intense sun was in Tasmania. So you can see here, even with the hat on, my freckles are out in full force. And so this is where I learned to appreciate the ozone layer. That's definitely much thinner down there, and you can totally feel it even when the temperatures aren't that hot. The sun itself is blazing and very intense. The friendliest place was definitely Ecuador. And there the people were so genuine and friendly and warm. This is a nice Otavalan woman waving to me as I ride my bicycle down the village streets. Very warm, welcoming, great people. The driest place was the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, which is actually known as the driest place in the world. And so we spent several days hiking across this desert. You can see me there in the purple, trudging along our desert track. The wettest place we visited was in New Zealand on the west coast of the southern island, which is often called the wet coast instead of the west coast, because it definitely gets a lot of rain. And while we were there, it rained and rained and rained and rained and rained. We spent a lot of time hunkered down inside that really tacky green camper van waiting for the clouds to lift and the rains to break. One of the upsides, though, however, is the rains create all of these great little waterfalls you can see here in this picture. So normally there aren't any waterfalls in places like this, but when the rains come, as they were when we were there, you get to see lots of special little temporary waterfalls. The coldest place we visited was Churchill in Manitoba, Canada, where it was unseasonably warm while we were there. It was only about 16 to 20 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. The flattest place we visited was Uyuni Salt Flats in Bolivia. You can see here, quite flat. And that flatness makes for some great perspective photos here. Glenn and I are making our shadows at sunset, several hundred feet long. And again, makes fabulous perspective photos. This is Glenn's brother Chris and his partner Darlene. And here's Chris and Glenn and I. So we had tons of fun out there on the salt flats, taking lots of perspective pictures. The saltiest place that we visited, I'm sure you can guess, was also in the Uyuni Salt Flats, and it was in a salt hotel there where everything was made of salt. The beds, the furniture, even the floor was covered with crushed salt. It sounded like you were walking around on crunchy snow as you moved around the room or out through the hallways. Even the shower was made of salt, which I think in hindsight was maybe not the brightest idea, but it definitely was a very interesting place to spend the night. The most remote place that we visited was Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island in Chile. And again, there you can have lots of fun with perspective photos with the Moai statues. You can see two new Moai there on the left in this photo. And here, jumping over the Moai or sitting on this fellow's nose in the right-hand side. So yeah, very remote. It is known as the most remote continuously inhabited location in the world, and you definitely feel it when you're out there. You are a long ways away from anything. The place we saw the most wildlife was in Bolivia, in both the Amazon jungle and the area known as the Pampas. At times it felt like you were on sort of the Jungle Boat cruise at Disneyland, where everywhere you looked there was wildlife. You almost didn't know where to focus because there was so much wildlife surrounding you all of the time. and a lot of it wanted to eat you. The muddiest hike that we went on was in Papayacta in Ecuador. This hike it wasn't very long really, but it took us forever to complete because the mud was so thick and so deep it would sort of grab onto your shoes. And Glenn and I admittedly spent the beginning portion of the hike trying to gingerly step on the mud and not get our feet muddy, which was a hopeless cause. And so it was quite the long, dirty, muddy hike. But as a result of that, it was super fun. The wettest hike that we had was in the driest place in the world, in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, where we spent a good portion of a day hiking up a canyon through this river. The rockiest hike was Barn Bluff in Tasmania, where we summited the top of this big bluff. I'll show you a picture of it here in a little bit. And most of the summiting was just over big boulders like this, all the way up to the top. The best meal was actually a meal we had while hiking in Thailand, just sort of along the hiking trail. It was this wonderful vegetable and chicken stir fry rice dish that was wrapped inside of a banana leaf. And I don't know if it was just that the hike was that hard or if the food was that good, but it truly was one of the tastiest, most enjoyable meals. And it had been made that morning by our guides over a campfire, and it was still warm and super tasty. They were some of the best cooks that we had during our entire trip. Biggest accomplishment was hiking the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. This had been really a lifelong dream of mine. When I was a child, we had a set of Encyclopedia Britannica encyclopedias next to the fireplace, and I always liked to look at the M book because my first name started with an M, being Michele. And so, of course, all of the coolest things in the world would start with M. And so I spent a lot of time looking at that book. And that's the first time I saw a picture of Machu Picchu. And as soon as I saw it, I knew it was a place that I wanted to see in person someday. And then I learned about the Inca Trail, and then it became wanting to hike the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. And I think that had been on the very top of my bucket list for really as long as I can remember. For those of you who maybe don't know much about the Inca Trail or haven't heard of it before, it is a very strenuous hike. It's at a pretty high altitude, and it is a lot of up and down these big rocky steps. And so, pretty steep, pretty strenuous activity. And for those of you who have known me for a while, or maybe have been following my blog, you'll know that for most of my adult life, doing something like hiking the Inca Trail was physically impossible. There's just no way that I would have been able to physically do it with the weight that I was carrying in my physical fitness level. And so, as I talk about on my blog, Glenn and I have spent the last several years really focusing on getting healthy and getting fit. And so it was a huge accomplishment to have been able to achieve that and to set out on this incredible challenge of hiking the Inca Trail. So you can see us there on the right hand side. We've just come through the Sun Gate, and you can see Machu Picchu back there in the background. And so this is our first glimpse of it. And you can sort of see in the picture my nose is red and my eyes are kind of glassy, and that's because I was truly just a blubbering mess the last 2 miles of the hike. I was so overwhelmed with emotion. I get a little teary-eyed just now talking about it, just to have been able to physically have accomplished something that had been a dream of mine for so long and seemed impossible for so long. And so here we are with some champagne celebrating our big accomplishment. My biggest disappointment was also Machu Picchu. We arrived at Machu Picchu, the previous pictures, in the late afternoon, and so by then all of the tourists had left for the day, and we really had the ruins to ourselves. And then you return the tour that we were on, you return the next day and have essentially the whole day to explore the ruins, and you end up doing it with thousands and thousands and thousands of other tourists. And so this is really what the ruins looked like. It was just this never-ending stream of tourists, and it was was pretty miserable and pretty hot, and so it was definitely one of the biggest disappointments. Just how crowded it was. It really took away from sort of really experiencing the ruins. The most underrated place that we visited was Tasmania. I worked with a gentleman who, when I was talking to him about our trip, I was talking about how we were going to southern Australia, and he said, "Well, you need to go to Tasmania then." And I'm like, "Tas, what? Where is that?" I had no idea. And so I finally look at a map, and I saw there's this large landmass, big island, off the southern tip of Australia, Tasmania, part of Australia, and so we decided to look into it, and we ended up going to Tasmania and doing one of the great walks there, a big 6-day trek, really kind of through the middle of Tasmania called the Overland Track, and it's truly one of the most beautiful, stunning settings I've ever experienced. So here's a couple ladies from our hiking group hiking along. This is Barn Bluff, so this was the rockiest hike that I had done, and so spent one morning summiting this big bluff. Really, everywhere you went in Tasmania, it was phenomenal scenery and absolutely beautiful. This was the second big summit that I did on our hike to the top of Mount Osa, and which is the tallest mountain in Tasmania. And here, you know, you can really just see forever, see all the way across Tasmania, and just stunning, beautiful scenery. And so I would highly recommend, if you ever find yourself in southern Australia, to take the time to go down and visit some of the wonders of Tasmania. So moving on to some of my favorite moments. These are just some of the things when I think back on our trip were just sort of some of my favorite moments of our travels. So one was this 5K fun run that we came across while we were in southern Australia. We were driving through this tiny little town, and we saw these signs for this 5K roo run, and we thought, well, how hard can that be? It's like, how cute! It's a little kangaroo. That'll be fun. And so we were going to be in the area when the race was happening, and so we signed up. And honestly, I think we were the only non-locals there. We were certainly the only Americans there, and so what we didn't realize when we signed up for it is the Australians are sort of a hardy lot, and this fun run involved running up the cliffs on the right-hand side. So you were either running uphill or you were running on the sand, both of which are incredibly difficult. And Glenn and I had not been consistently running, and so pulling off a 5K was challenging enough, but to do it in that terrain almost killed us. And so by the time we finally finished, the announcer sort of yelled over the loudspeaker, "Yay! Our Americans have finally finished!" And so anyhow, we were sort of quite the celebrities, but it was definitely very challenging, but because of that, it was very memorable. Another great memory I have is a boat ride that we took in southern Chile through some of the fjords, and it was during the Independence Day celebration, which is really more of a week and involves a lot of drinking of alcohol and eating of meat on sticks. And so, anyhow, everything shuts down, and it's a big celebratory week with parades and all sorts of festivities. And so we found ourselves on this big boat, and I spent most of the people were either down in the bar or elsewhere, and so I had the deck of this boat pretty much to myself, and I just sat out there all bundled up for hours and hours and hours watching this beautiful scenery go by, including scenes like this lovely little town at the base of this beautiful volcano. Another fond memory is piranha fishing in the Bolivian Amazon. And so while I did not catch any piranha, Glenn and Glenn's brother Chris did. And so you can see Glenn there on the left with his piranha. I think there was some debate about who had to pull the hook out of the piranha's mouth. We then took the piranha back to the lodge we were staying and cooked them up and had them for lunch, and they were actually surprisingly tasty. The another fun memory was learning to do a Tim Tam Slam in Tasmania while we were backpacking through Tasmania. And for those of you that don't know, a Tim Tam is a cookie, or as they would say, a biscuit. It's sort of a wafer cookie with frosting between the two wafers, and then it's dipped in chocolate. And apparently, the thing that you do, and sort of what you master as a child, is you master the fine art of a Tim Tam Slam. And it seems every Australian has their opinions on the proper way to do it. But essentially, in this case, I was told to bite the opposing ends off of the cookie, and then you suck warm tea or coffee through the cookie, which turns the middle into this warm, gooey mess. And then the trick is to get it into your mouth before it falls apart in your hands. And so, all the while I was doing this here, you imagine me surrounded by a bunch of Australians who all are critiquing my technique on doing this wonderful Tim Tam Slam. Another fun memory was this little Cotamundi named Timo in Bolivia. And for some reason, he was sort of a semi-tame Cotamundi that hung out at this lodge we were staying at. And he seemed to just really take a liking to me. And so when I would hang out in the hammocks, he would come over and visit and crawl up in my lap and want me to rub his belly. And he would give me little kisses on my neck and behind my ear and make these cute little squeaks. And so I had lots of fun hanging out with him. Hiking across Tongariro in New Zealand is also a great memory, mostly because of how hard I had to work to get this picture. So the day that we did this hike, it's a pretty grueling 19-mile hike, and the day we did it was freezing cold, incredibly windy and rainy, and really almost everything was obscured in clouds. We were walking in clouds almost the whole time. But I was determined to get this photo. This area, Tongariro, is the area that's really inspired the Mount Doom in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and a lot of the footage or parts of the film in Mordor were filmed here, and so it's just such stunning scenery that I sat on a rock outcropping in the freezing wind for about 15 to 20 minutes, waiting for the clouds to break for just an instant so that I could get this picture. And finally it happened. I think literally the clouds were lifted for about 3 seconds and then they came rolling back in. And so, but I got this picture, so it's a great memory. Glenn, on the other hand, was much smarter than me, and he was hanging out on the other side of the ridge in a rock outcropping out of the wind. But by the time I got to him, I was a popsicle, but I had my picture. Another fun memory was galloping on the dunes in Chile. And so I had ridden horses as a child and done a fair amount of trail riding and other riding as an adult. And so I was really excited to have the opportunity to ride horses in the Atacama Desert. And although they don't look at it in the picture on the right there, these horses were pretty spunky and they really loved to run, which is always a treat to have a horse with that sort of an attitude. And we were instructed by the cowboy guy there on the left to, when you gallop on these horses, what you did is you put your feet way up by the horse's mouth and you basically laid back in the saddle like a big recliner. And so when he said this, I thought, well, maybe this can't be right. It must be lost in translation. But nope, that's what you were supposed to do. And so when in Rome, that's what we did. And, I tell you, as soon as you put your feet up by the horse's mouth and leaned back and let go of the reins just a little bit, the horses took off across the dunes. And it was the smoothest, funnest experience I've ever had galloping on horses. Who would have thought that laying backwards like it was a lazy boy recliner was the thing to do? But it was magnificent and it was super fun. Swimming with the sea lions in the Galapagos Islands was also a huge highlight for me. I love dogs, and really these sea lions, it was like swimming with a bunch of puppies, and they would come and swim with you and do flips, and were just very playful and mischievous and entertaining for really hours at a time almost. And so it was a treat. It was something I had really wanted to have the opportunity to do, and so once we got to do it, it was pure joy. Starlight in the Atacama Desert. I had heard the term starlight before, but I think I had not really ever realized what it meant. And what I learned is that particularly both I think in the southern hemisphere there are so many more stars, and then in the Atacama Desert you're up pretty high. There's not a lot of so the atmosphere is thinner and it's dry there, and so the stars are just out in force as you can see in this picture here, and it's so bright just from the light of the stars that it lights up the surroundings. And so it almost looked as though the moon was out, but it was really just the stars. And so at 2 o'clock in the morning, I could climb out of the tent and I could walk around the campsite without needing a flashlight, and I could just navigate by the light of the stars. And so that was a pretty spectacular thing to experience. Another great memory was on the Inca Trail. We were hit by this crazy hailstorm that just came out of nowhere. And so, as I mentioned before, the Inca Trail is made up of these fairly treacherous and fairly steep stone walkways and staircases more often than not. And so they're hard enough to walk on when they're dry, but when they are covered with running water and little tiny balls of ice, they become quite the ordeal. And so I was having a fabulous time. This is Glenn here in both of these pictures trudging through the hail. You can see how much it hailed on the right hand side. It just was a crazy experience. He wasn't loving it as much as I was, but I was having a ball. And when we got to our camp, the porters, some of which who have hiked the Inca Trail 400 plus times, had never experienced anything like this, and so it felt pretty special to have experienced this on the trail. Biking the Death Road in Bolivia was also a spectacular experience. This is one of those things, there were a few on my trip that I didn't tell my mother I was doing until after it was done. And this, for those of you who don't know, is a fairly notorious road in Bolivia where several hundred people a year used to die on this road. Big buses going over the cliff sides. Some of the cliffs, it's 1,000 foot drop straight down off the side of the road. They have since built another road where most of the car travel goes, and so now this road, it's pretty much just people on these bicycles bombing down this road. And so still pretty dangerous, but lots of fun, and certainly a great memory. I had tons of fun. Seeing the macaws in Bolivia was also another great experience. We hiked up onto the top of this cliff. You can see there in the upper left, that is Darlene. And we were able to look down on the canopy of the Amazon jungle below us and see these wild macaws flying over the jungle and landing in the trees near us. And it was my experience with macaws in the past have just been really in pet stores, and so to see them in the wild and see them flying and soaring in pairs and in groups was truly a spectacular experience. Seeing the Northern Lights, we got to do that in Manitoba on several occasions actually, and seeing the Northern Lights was on Glenn's bucket list, and so we were able to check that off the list for him, and were able to see lots of different colors and different types and styles of Northern Lights, including one night where we were able to see the lights really move quickly and dance across the sky. So, well, one of the things when I got back from the trip, everyone was asking, what was your favorite part of the trip? And it's really almost impossible to be able to say what sort of my most favorite place or experience was, but I have tried to narrow it down. And so the last part of my presentation here is to share with you my top 5 experiences, sort of my top 5 oh my heck experiences that I had on the trip. These are sort of the curl your toe sort of things that really will be forever etched in my mind as some of the coolest things I've ever experienced in my life. So, Number five. Number five happened in Ecuador, in the Amazon jungle in Ecuador. And we had these two guides who were leading us through on some nature walks. Here they are digging the grubs out of the tree for Glenn's lunch. And as we were walking along, they would point out different plants and animals and what they were used for, and the things that could cure you and the things that could kill you. And so it was very fascinating. And one of the things that the guide was looking for was one of the things that could kill you, which is a snake, and it is the fer de lance, which is known as the deadliest snake in South America. And the reason for that is it's such an aggressive snake. So while a lot of snakes might move away when they hear you coming down the trail, this snake will actually is very territorial and will stand its ground and will essentially come at you. And so he was busy looking for this snake along the trail. And at one point I was right behind him, and at one point he's walking along and he literally stopped and raised about 2 feet in the air and levitated backwards. And when I looked down, this is what we saw. This was the fer de lance, right in the middle of the trail, eating a big bloated frog for lunch. And so it was really amazing both to get to see this snake and to get to see this snake with something in his mouth so he could not bite you. And so we got to stand here and watch him swallow this frog whole. And so that was pretty amazing. So as this was happening, I was taking pictures and I thought, well, the snake is busy. And so I'm going to get down pretty close and see if I can get a good close-up photo of the snake. And so as I was doing so, leaning down, all of a sudden there was this huge clanging noise, and it was my aluminum water bottle had fallen out of the side pocket of my backpack as I leaned forward and all but hit the snake on top of the head. So it landed just right in front of the snake and then bounced over the snake. And because it was an aluminum bottle, it made this huge clanging noise. So needless to say, we were all focused on the snake, and hearing that noise, we all screamed and jumped. Glenn ended up running up the trail the other way, and it was quite dramatic. And so then we all started laughing and kind of calmed down and retrieved my water bottle. And by then, the snake was almost done with this frog. You can see here just the little two legs sticking out. And I swear the snake is looking at me and saying, "I'm coming after you next, lady," as soon as I finish my lunch here. And so at this point, we decided it was time to leave since I had probably aggravated the snake a fair bit. Ever after that, as we were hiking through the jungle, the big joke became, if there was anything dangerous, to get Michele up there with her water bottle so she could protect everyone. So anyhow, so that was truly an unforgettable experience. Number four, so my fourth uh, uh, amazing experience involved these penguins in the Galapagos Islands. And so we had set out to go snorkeling on this one island, and the guides had told us that if we were lucky, we might see one or two of these penguins, but probably we wouldn't, so don't expect that. And so I'm snorkeling along, and all of a sudden I see these penguins, this big pod of penguins come swimming by. And I happen to have my video camera going right at the last second, and so I was able to capture it. The neat thing is, too, these penguins really gave Glenn one of his most memorable experiences of the trip, in that he was standing in about waist deep in the water over by the beach, and these penguins had come up and were actually swimming through his legs chasing a school of fish. And so they were dancing through his legs and flipping fish up and hitting him in the chest and the face with these fish. And so here's the video of the penguins just swimming by. So pretty spectacular experience, especially because we weren't expecting to see that at all. So number three, the third most amazing experience was visiting these rescued elephants in Thailand at a place called Elephant Nature Park. And this is a truly wonderful, magical place. It is a sanctuary, about 250 acres, where there are about anywhere from 35 to 40 elephants that have been rescued either from the logging industry or from the tourism industry, where they're forced to to give tourist rides or perform in shows or do art or those sorts of things. And or There were a lot of elephants there that had suffered injuries, either logging injuries or stepping on landmines. And so they are here, they live in freedom and comfort and are surrounded with love and are no longer forced to be in servitude to humans. So it's truly a spectacular place, and we spent 2 days there, and we got to be with the elephants, feed them, pet them, walk around with them, and they are just truly filled with joy and love, and it's great to see that they get to live out their final days in peace and surrounded by other elephants that they are either family, adopted family, real family, and friends. So here I am with two of my most favorite elephants that I met. I'm standing there petting an elephant named May Perm, and the elephant on the left is Jokia. And these two ladies have been the best of friends for almost 20 years, and May Perm was actually the very first elephant that was rescued at the Elephant Nature Park, the elephant again that I'm petting. And Jokia is completely blind, the elephant on the left, and so she relies on May Perm to guide her around and help her find her way. And these two, they're old grandma elephants. I think they're about 80 years old. And they were so sweet and so gentle. I could have spent all day sitting out in this field, just adoring them and petting them while they chewed on corn in great companionship. It's actually quite sad. I just learned that May Perm, the elephant that I am petting, passed away this week in her sleep. And so I'm really thankful that she got to live out her final days in such a wonderful, loving place. But I'm truly heartbroken for her friend Jokia, the blind elephant, who is certainly incredibly sad at the loss of her friend and is currently trying to figure out sort of what's going on. So I'm hopeful they will be able to find her another friend to help her through her remaining days. So this is a video that I took, some of the videos of these elephants. This again is actually May Perm and Jokia, and they're just spectacular. They walk up to visit you, probably looking to see if you have any watermelon for them. I still remember what their skin felt like under my hands, the whiskers, the wrinkles, what it felt like for them to wrap their trunks around their hand, around your hand as you fed them watermelon. Here's a little baby Yindi getting sort of a butt scratch from his mahout and a belly rub from his mom. And Yindi loved to chase the dogs. There's lots of rescued dogs, almost 400 dogs. And here he is chasing the dogs, making little squeaks. So anyhow, I loved the elephants, and it has given me a great passion for trying to fight for the same sorts of freedoms for elephants here in the United States. I definitely here in Portland would love to see the elephants at the Oregon Zoo be given the same opportunity to have space and freedom on a sanctuary instead of in a zoo enclosure. So my number two most memorable event was waking up to this view. And this view here, the Sacred Valley in Peru, truly a stunning, beautiful sight. And so this was actually the view from our bed in our hotel room. And this was also the view from our bed in our hotel room. And so if you can see behind our head there, that's a road and a river way down below us because we were sleeping in one of these. And so Glenn called these the pods of death, but basically it was a glass pod hanging off the side of a cliff. And that is where we spent the evening. And to get there, there's no elevators. You have to climb up the side of the cliff on essentially these big metal staples that they have driven into the side of the cliff. And typically, they have three of these pods, and they pick you up at your hotel room and bring you out here, and you start climbing up to your pod. in the early afternoon. And so you're climbing up maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then they make you dinner and you enjoy the view and you spend the night. And then in the morning, you head out. However, there was a big labor strike while we were here, and as a result, protesters had closed off all of the roads, and so they were not able to come and pick us up at our hotel. And so by the time they were finally able to retrieve us, it was almost 8 o'clock at night, which meant that we had to climb up the side of this cliff in pitch darkness. Which on some level maybe made it easier because you couldn't see how high up you were, but it was definitely very disorienting because you didn't know how far up you were, how much further you had to go, what was coming up. It was just, you were just surrounded by complete darkness except for the little beam of light from your headlamp. And so it was truly a harrowing experience, and a unique experience because really everyone else who has ever done this activity has done it in the daytime, and so we got to have the unique experience of doing it at night. And so again, then in the morning, you get up and they serve you breakfast with this amazing view. This other couple here was the other couple in the other pod that we hiked up with that night. And so you have breakfast, and then they sort of strap you in and you zip line down the side of the cliff back down to the road below. So this video here gives you a sense of sort of what it looks like as we're climbing up. So you can see the staples there. Here in a minute you'll see the view down below. So this is me climbing up. And there you can see the view down to the road. And so you're tied onto this cable, so it's pretty safe. And it was truly a spectacular experience, and something I'm really glad that we did. And for those of you that are curious, yes, it did have a fully functioning bathroom. I'm not really going to go in the details of how it worked, but as you can imagine, this is the best view that either Glenn and I have ever had from a toilet, to be sure. All right, so number one, this is sort of the most amazing number one experience of our entire trip, and it actually is a bunch of experiences rolled into one, and that is looking for the polar bears in Churchill, Manitoba, up in Canada. And so here we are. You can see the polar bear tracks there on the right, and you can see we are going towards the polar bear, not away from the polar bear. And so that is what we went all the way up there to do. And so I just want to give you a little sense of why you go to Churchill to see polar bears. So this is where Churchill, Manitoba is located, right on the Hudson Bay. And you can see there's a little 90-degree angle there, which comes into play. And so there again is Churchill and the Hudson Bay. And so the polar bears that sort of live in this area spend the summer denning and resting and relaxing down on the southern edge there of the Hudson Bay. And then as it gets to be winter and starts getting cold, the water on the Hudson Bay freezes. The earliest place that it freezes is right here around Churchill in late October and early November. So in the winter, the polar bears make their way up the coast past Churchill, looking for that ice to begin forming on the Hudson Bay. And then they go out on the ice and hunt seals, and then they ride the ice as the ice melts. They ride the ice back down to the south and then get off and spend the summer waiting for the ice to come back again. And so it's like a big polar bear conveyor belt, basically. And so if you are in Churchill during the right time of the year, you are there while all of these polar bears are making their way up and out to the ice. And so you may have seen pictures like this before. There are these big vehicles known as tundra buggies that take you out and you get to see the polar bears. The polar bears are a little bit bored because they're waiting on that ice and they're a little curious. And so they often come up to the buggies to say hi. And this is how most of the tourists get to see the polar bears. We, however, did a tour where you got to go out on foot to see the polar bears. So that's a very unique experience and truly a spectacular experience to be on the ground with such amazing animals. And so you spend a lot of time looking for polar bears. And this is one of our guides here looking out across the landscape. And as you can imagine, you're looking for a white bear on the white snow. And so there's lots and lots and lots of looking. And the guides kept telling us the bears are there. You just got to keep looking. You'll see them. And they described them as being sort of a cream or an ivory color instead of white. And so really the landscape looks like this. It's either white or there might be some brown from the rocks or the trees. And so on our first day there, we spent most of the afternoon out walking around looking for bears, and we just didn't see any bears. And so we were headed back to the lodge, still looking for a bear. And the guide in front of me stopped and he said, "There's a polar bear right in front of us." And so I started looking, and it was just white, 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 brown, white, cream, white, brown. And I was like, whoa, what? Whoa, there's cream. And so I scanned back, and there he was. My first polar bear encounter was this guy. He became known as Dirty Bear because he had this dirty little butt, which is pretty uncommon for the polar bears, actually. And so he was the first polar bear that I got to see in the wild. And actually, when we first saw him, he was actually lumbering towards us, and that was a pretty amazing experience to look up and see this huge predator walking straight towards you. And so, yeah, it was pretty spectacular, and I will forever remember Dirty Bear and what it was like to see my very first polar bear. Over the course of a couple days, we got to see lots of other polar bears. These pictures were all taken by my brother-in-law, Glenn's brother Chris, but we got to see lots of moms with cubs. This bear was probably my favorite bear we got to see because she was just so beautiful and soft and fluffy and cuddly looking, even though, certainly that's not, you wouldn't want to give her a hug because that could end poorly, but just truly beautiful, magnificent animals. Lots of little babies, and the babies are super tired all of the time. Their metabolisms are in very low gear, and so the little babies would just sort of fall asleep anytime their moms stopped walking. They would just sit down and fall asleep like this cute little guy here. This was a huge male that we got to see really just kind of curl up in a ball. He dug out this little bed and he spun around like a dog does, and then he laid down and fell asleep. These guys, these are three young males, and a lot of the males spend their time as they're hanging out waiting on the ice. They spar and play fight with each other to learn valuable skills for when they are older adult male bears. And here you can see the one bear sitting up, there's another one laying down in the background, and then the one in the foreground is actually laying on his back with his paws up in the air. They tend to overheat when they play around and play fight, and so they'll take breaks to cool off, and then they'll get up and go again. You can see all the snow in front of them is all disturbed from where they were wrestling around. Another amazing thing, we were flown out of Churchill quite a ways to a remote lodge, and it was pretty much every single morning we woke up and got to drink coffee and look out the window at the polar bears that had decided to bed down for the night outside of the lodge. And so this is me and Glenn looking out at this big polar bear first thing in the morning as the sun was coming up. Other great experiences happened just, yeah, right outside the window of the lodge here. We are in the lodge, and there was this mother and her two cubs that had bedded down just right. There's a lake in front of the lodge, a big frozen lake, and they had bedded down right on the edge of that lake. And so in the morning, we got to watch them as they woke up and got going, and the mother decided it was time to head out, and she started heading out across the frozen lake. And the little male cub, which is the one on the left, sort of decided that he wanted to come check out the lodge instead. And so he turned around and he came up past where they had bedded down, up over the snowbank, and came over to the lodge and sat here and looked up in the windows at all of the people who were looking out at him. And eventually his sister, the cub on the right, decided she wanted to check it out too, and so she also wandered over, and she wasn't quite as confident, so she stayed a little further away. And meanwhile, the mother was out on the frozen lake, sort of pacing back and forth, and you could tell she was huffing and probably calling them by their middle names and telling them it was time to go. Eventually, the mother decided to come over, and she too checked out the lodge for a little bit. And then, you could tell it was one of those things where she was like, okay, you can have 5 more minutes on the playground, but then we have to go. And eventually, she put her foot down and said it was time to go. And her little cubs followed her off across the frozen lake, a bit reluctantly, there you can see. So that was pretty spectacular. And then there were just lots of other experiences with mothers and cubs. So this mom and cubs we watched. Uh, they were bedded down here in the snow, and so we got to watch them sort of snuggle and take a nice late morning nap. And as we were watching them, we became aware of the fact that there was a large male polar bear coming up behind us. And so that was quite the experience to be standing with mom and two cubs in front of you and a big male bear behind you. And then it got even better because another mom and two cubs came in off of the ice. And so we were standing in one spot, and while we were standing there, all of these bears pretty much converged around us, including at one point the moms and the two cubs passed each other right in front of us, which was a truly spectacular thing to see. And I love this picture because the little cubs, just seeing the little cubs sort of checking each other out as these two moms pass each other. So the big male bear at this point had decided to, he headed off towards the lodge where we were staying. Often they will smell the lodge and go to check things out. And so we had been out on the ice all morning and it was freezing. So your feet were freezing, your hands were freezing, your face was freezing. You'd been out there a long time. You had to pee. And so a lot of people from our group decided to go back to the lodge in the hopes of seeing the big male bear and also to go inside and get warmed up. And so I was headed in as well, along with Glenn and his brother Chris. And at the last minute decided, I think I want to stay out on the ice with this mom and cubs. And so you can see the mom and the two cubs in the background there. And so I turned around and Chris, Glenn's brother, came with me. And I'm so glad that we did that because I had probably what is the coolest experience of my entire life with this mom and her two cubs. And so I think because we were a much smaller group at this point, fewer people, the mom came close to us. She got pretty curious and came over to us to investigate. And so Glenn's brother Chris caught a video of this experience, and so I am going to show that now. But before I do, I just want to explain a few things that you're going to see in the video that you might have questions about. So a couple of things. One is you'll see that the mother has a radio collar around her neck, and so a lot of the females bears are fitted with these radio collars because it turns out that the female polar bear head is bigger than their neck, and so the radio collar will stay on, whereas the male's neck is bigger than their head, and so the radio collars don't stay on. And so a lot of the female bears are outfitted with the collars, which helps the scientists and the game people track the polar bear population. And so you'll see that. Another thing that you see one of the guides here, and they have a lot of tools and techniques that they use to keep you safe around the polar bears. So their goal is to have you close enough to the polar bears that you can have an amazing interaction, but also far enough away that everyone stays safe, including the bears. And so you will see that the guides use their voices and their body language, stomping their feet, stepping forward, to sort of tell the bears when they've gotten a little too close. The bears also live really almost in complete silence, and so noises can be startling to them. And so you'll hear the guide smacking a couple of rocks together to make a noise. The guides also have pepper spray, like bear spray. They have little guns that fire sort of loud firecrackers and little whizzers sort of things, which can scare the bears away. And then if necessary, they also, you can see there have weapons and are armed as well, but that certainly is a last resort and isn't anything that they've ever had to use. But they have all of these tools that they use to try to keep you safe and keep the bears safe. And so you will see them employ several of these with this mama bear that decided she wanted to come check us out, which is a pretty intense experience to have. Really, I think it is the largest land predator, looking you straight in the eye and sort of looking like she's gone from curious to, I wonder if you might be a little tasty. And so it was pretty spectacular, and to have her two cubs right there beside her the whole time. So I'll show you the video, and I'm not really going to talk during it just so that you can get the full experience.
Oh, that's close enough. You don't have to run. Hey, Mom. Joe, move into the group. Adrian, move in. Move in. You guys stand up. Move in tight. You're not paying attention to those cracking rocks, are you? What you looking at, Mom? Come on.
So, yes, pretty amazing experience. I have to say, towards the end of that video there's a point in time where the bear starts to turn around, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief. There was a point in time there where I will admit that I was hiding behind my brother-in-law. And so if anyone was going to get eaten, I was pretty sure it was going to be him instead of me. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. A friend of mine, who actually is the person who inspired my travels on this trip, Kim, posted this on her Facebook page, and I just thought that it was very fitting, certainly for our trip, and I neither Glenn or I have any regrets whatsoever for the amount of time that we took off of work, the sort of the stress and the strain and the effort and the money and everything that it took to go off and have this 6-month adventure. We really collected a lifetime worth of memories in that 6 months, and I feel so fortunate that both I had the opportunity to do it, and that I had such a wonderful partner to do it with, and that I had the health and the fitness to be able to go out and do all of these things that I had always dreamed of, and check all sorts of things off my bucket list and discover new things that should have been on my bucket list that I had never heard of before. So really, it was a phenomenal experience, and I think I would encourage anyone who has been thinking, well, I would love to do that, but it's impossible, or I can't do it because, and certainly Glenn and I were there every time we thought about it. We had a million reasons why it wasn't possible. And one by one, we figured those barriers out and we found solutions and we worked our way through. And years later, really, we were in a position where we could say, okay, it's time, we're going to go take this trip. And so I would encourage everyone to, if this is something that you think you would want to do, even if, 6 months might be more than you think you can handle, finding a way to get out there in the world and experience all of the things that you had always thought about and dreamed about would be, certainly no regrets, and I highly recommend it. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my video here in this presentation. For those of you who have been following along on this trip, or even those of you who've been with following our journey of health and fitness that I've talked about on my blog as well, I really appreciate that. It's great to have people out there cheering us on, and I feel very fortunate to be able to share our story with others. And so I encourage you to check out my blog. Certainly, will not be the end of our adventures, and it certainly isn't the end of our fitness journey. And so there will be lots of blog posts in the future. And again, I thank you so much for your support and for following along with us. Thanks. Bye bye.